Everyone remembers Queen Victoria as the widow who never stopped mourning Prince Albert. After his death, she dressed in black for the rest of her life. His rooms were preserved. His memory seemed to follow her everywhere. But here is the part of their famous love story that is often softened. Victoria and Albert could fight viciously. Behind the image of the perfect Victorian family was a marriage filled with jealousy, pregnancies Victoria despised, arguments over power, Albert's frustration with his wife's temper, and a queen who sometimes seemed far more interested in her husband than in motherhood. And yet, through all of it, Victoria absolutely adored that man. Their marriage was passionate, complicated, and when Albert died, something inside Victoria seemed to die with him. Victoria and Albert were first cousins, both born in 1819. Their relatives had considered them a possible match for years, but when Albert arrived in England in October 1839, the 20-year-old queen didn't need much convincing. She was captivated. Victoria described Albert as handsome, with beautiful blue eyes, a delicate nose and a slight moustache. And because Victoria was the reigning monarch, Albert couldn't simply propose to her. She had to propose to him. On October 15, 1839, she summoned Albert privately and asked him to marry her. He accepted. They married on February 10, 1840, and Victoria's journal leaves little doubt about her physical attraction to her new husband. Her surviving writings describe intense happiness and intimacy during their honeymoon. But almost immediately, reality arrived. Victoria became pregnant, and honestly, she hated it. Victoria and Albert would eventually have 9 children, but don't mistake 9 pregnancies for a woman who loved being pregnant. She didn't. Victoria later described pregnancy as the shadow side of marriage. She complained that it left her feeling trapped and reduced to something animal-like. She disliked breastfeeding and, could be startlingly blunt about babies. She once admitted, "I'm no admirer of babies." And when discussing childbirth with her eldest daughter, Victoria compared women in that condition to animals, rather than embracing the sentimental Victorian ideal of sacred motherhood. That contradiction defined much of her private life. Victoria loved the intimacy of marriage. She loved Albert. But intimacy kept producing pregnancies, and pregnancy temporarily separated her from the political life and personal freedom she desperately valued. Within the first 8 years of marriage, Victoria gave birth to 6 children. And while Victoria was pregnant, recovering from childbirth and caring for an expanding royal family, Albert's position grew stronger. This created another problem. Victoria was queen. Albert was her husband. And in the beginning, those two facts didn't fit comfortably together. Albert arrived in Britain expecting to have meaningful responsibilities, but legally and constitutionally, Victoria held the power. He reportedly complained about being merely the husband rather than master of the household. Gradually, however, Albert became indispensable. He read government papers, helped draft correspondence, advised Victoria politically, and increasingly became her closest working partner. Victoria depended upon him more and more. But the same man she worshipped could also infuriate her, because Victoria had a ferocious temper. Albert was controlled, methodical, and disciplined. Victoria was emotional, passionate, and explosive. When they argued, Albert often refused to continue while Victoria was angry. Instead, he might leave the room or communicate with her in writing. Some surviving correspondence reveals just how troubled their arguments could become. Albert criticized what he regarded as Victoria's inability to control her emotions and warned that her outbursts damaged their relationship. Victoria, meanwhile, could become furious when she felt Albert was cold or withdrawing from her. This was not a permanently serene royal household. It was 2 extremely strong personalities repeatedly colliding. And there was another source of conflict: their children. Victoria did love her children, but You know, motherhood did not come naturally to her in the sentimental way Victorian society expected. She could criticize their appearances brutally. She complained about pregnancy. She disliked newborn babies. And, well, she sometimes resented how much of Albert's attention the children consumed. Albert generally took a more systematic interest in their upbringing. The children were subjected to carefully planned education and discipline because Albert believed they were building a model royal family. But Victoria's relationship with some of them became extraordinarily complicated, especially their eldest son. Albert Edward, Bertie, the future Edward VII. Albert considered Bertie lazy and undisciplined. Victoria became increasingly disappointed in him too. Then, in 1861, scandal exploded. Bertie became involved with an actress named Nellie Clifton. When Albert discovered what had happened, he was horrified. He went to confront his son. Albert was already unwell, and shortly afterward, his condition deteriorated dramatically. Then, on December 14th, 1861, Prince Albert died. He was only 42 years old, and Victoria shattered. "My life as a happy one is ended." The woman who could scream at Albert, fight with Albert, resent his criticism, and battle him over children, politics, and control, suddenly wanted nothing more than to have him back. Victoria's grief was overwhelming. She blamed Bertie in part for the stress she believed had contributed to Albert's decline, although Albert had suffered health problems before the scandal. Her husband of 21 years was gone. Her lover was gone. Her political partner was gone. The person who had increasingly organized both her private world and her monarchy was gone, and Victoria refused to let his presence disappear. She withdrew heavily from public life. She wore mourning black. Albert's rooms were maintained with extraordinary care. His clothes and personal belongings remained part of the ritual surrounding his memory. Monuments rose across Britain. His image was preserved almost as though Victoria were trying to transform a complicated flesh and blood husband into something untouchable. Because death did something remarkable to their marriage. It erased the arguments. The Albert Victoria remembered publicly became the perfect husband. And that's what makes Victoria and Albert's marriage more interesting than the fairy tale. They were not two people who spent 21 years peacefully staring into each other's eyes. Victoria could be jealous, demanding, and explosive. Albert could be stern, critical, and emotionally withdrawn during their disputes. They disagreed over Victoria's behavior. They struggled over Albert's position. Pregnancy repeatedly disrupted Victoria's happiness. Their children's upbringing became another battlefield. But beneath all of that dysfunction was something undeniable. Victoria was deeply attached to him, perhaps too attached. Albert had become husband, lover, advisor, confidant, and emotional anchor all at once. So when he disappeared, Victoria didn't simply lose her husband. She lost the person around whom she had built almost her entire adult emotional life. Prince Albert died in 1861. Queen Victoria lived for another 39 years. She never remarried, and when she died in January 1901 at the age of 81, she was still associated with the mourning clothes she had adopted after losing Albert decades earlier. Their marriage had contained passion, arguments, power struggles, children she sometimes struggled to understand, a husband who sometimes struggled to tolerate her temper, and moments when neither seemed particularly easy to live with. But Victoria's reaction to Albert's death tells us something that the polished portraits of the perfect royal family cannot. Their marriage didn't have to be perfect for her love to be real. For 21 years they fought, reconciled, raised 9 children, and helped reshape the British monarchy together. Then Albert died, and for almost 4 decades afterward, Queen Victoria continued living in the shadow of the man she had loved, fought with, and never truly got over.